today I'm going to be interviewing Nadia Seeteram. She's a doctoral student in the Department of Earth and Environment at FIU. So Nadia, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your area of research?
My area of research is sea level rise and exploring the effects of sea level rise, but more so on human populations. Really trying to understand, how sea level rise might disproportionately affect people here in Miami. That includes covering topics from climate gentrification to migration and displacement, the way that our governments are responding, especially as they try to make us a more resilient society. So really trying to hone in on some of these very challenging questions as we move forward.
Many of those terms that you mentioned are probably pretty abstract to most people, right? And not that easy to communicate. So how do you communicate with non-scientists about that? And what do you think are the challenges of getting people involved in these topics?
What I find is most useful is if I'm going to say, try to explain climate gentrification, I might try to ground that concept in a personal narrative, make it real for someone. And it usually works best if it's, very regional, very localized information. Using images, I think, is also a really good way of conveying it, but this is a problem that we have with climate change, as it is a very abstract concept, as are many of its impacts, especially since you don't feel them right at this moment. I do notice that when people start to feel things such as floodings or wildfires, it becomes very real for them. And so in our communication, that's the goal, try to make it real for people.
So many people have drawn parallels between climate change and the new coronavirus. That is the reason why we're doing this interview through Zoom instead of in person. Do you see parallels between those two?
I see lots of parallels just in the way that how the pandemic is sort of playing out. I'm just going to maybe name a few so I remember to get to them all. The one big, the way that I see this breaking down is both are these huge pressing challenges for society that demand an international response. They sort of demand cooperation at all levels of society, and also they really integrate these issues of justice. They are playing out in society in an unequal way. We know that both of these things definitely affect everyone, but they're not affecting us all equally. And finally, they both sort of require this transformation of society. We're not going to just be able to sort of go back to the way things were, and I think in either instance.
Tell me more about the unequal effect that both COVID and climate change have on people, because many people have referred to COVID as the great equalizer that affects everyone, regardless of social strata. But what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are something can't be a great equalizer when you have an unequal society. We do not have an equal society. We in fact have a very racialized society, and we are seeing this virus play out on racialized lines, just like we will see the climate crisis play out on racialized lines. With regards to COVID-19, we are seeing cities like New Orleans and Detroit just report having higher levels of mortality amongst African American communities. This is usually having to do with some sort of associated comorbidity. With the climate crisis, these African American communities, indigenous communities, elderly populations are all exceptionally vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, depending on where they are sort of located. Spatially, their inability to sort of react to a challenge, whether that be flooding or wildfires. Either way, when we have vulnerability in our society, things like a pandemic or climate crisis will definitely exacerbate them.
So what kind of research and advocacy needs to be done to find some solutions to these issues?
I think we really need to actually do targeted research towards addressing these problems. I think what I see sort of ongoing, at least with questions of climate, is sort of having this one-size-fits-all approach to adaptation, resilience, and we really need to be thinking about specific needs that communities have. For example, in Miami, we are very focused on building climate resilience. But how does that differ from community to community? You know, what makes a resilient little Haiti might be very different from what makes Shorecrest resilient. And so we really need to be thinking about that thoughtfully within our research, and so that it is expressed within our policy.